I'm Roberta. Standing on the wide porch of this old southern estate, I watch the last light of the day slip behind the ridges. The air is filled with the smell of wood smoke and pine, and the mountains stretch endlessly before me. My son, Lucas, stands beside me, holding the small robot he's been working on all week. It's hard to believe how far we've come. A few months ago, my life was in shambles. I was a math teacher in a middle school in Memphis, Tennessee. I loved my job, and I measured my success by the progress of my students. But my husband, Victor, saw things differently. He was a successful businessman, and he wanted a wife who could support his career and social status. One evening, we were at a family dinner. The dining room was filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the low hum of conversations about new cars, vacation homes, and successful business ventures. I sat quietly at the far end of the long oak table, my hands folded in my lap. I was wearing a simple black dress that I had bought on clearance a few years ago. It was a bit tight around the waist, but it was all I could afford. Victor leaned back in his chair, a glass of scotch in his hand. His eyes slid toward me with the same look he had given me countless times before, a mixture of irritation and embarrassment. "Some men get wives who are their partners in success," he said loudly enough for the whole table to hear. "Roberta here insists on staying as a school teacher, making what? $35,000 a year, barely enough to keep gas in the car." The room chuckled politely, and my face flushed crimson. I stared at the china plate in front of me, pushing peas around with my fork. His mother, Amelia, gave a sweet, poisonous smile as she reached for another serving of casserole. "He's not wrong, dear. You really should think about presenting yourself differently. A woman reflects her husband, after all. Look at Stella, always polished, always at Victor's side when he goes to business functions." At the mention of Stella, my chest tightened. Everyone at the table knew who she was. She was the young, glamorous owner of a chain of high-end boutiques downtown, often spotted on Victor's arm at fundraisers and social events where I was no longer welcome. They didn't bother to hide the comparison. One of Victor's cousins chimed in. "Such style. She could open a magazine with those looks, and she helps out at Victor's networking events, right? That's what I call a supportive partner." I pressed my lips together, forcing myself not to respond. I thought of my students back at school, the way their eyes lit up when a difficult equation finally made sense. The pride in helping kids who had no one else cheering for them. But here, none of that counted. To them, I was just a frumpy teacher with an outdated haircut and a job that brought shame instead of status. Victor leaned closer, his voice a hiss only I could hear. "You embarrass me. You don't dress like the other wives. You don't act like them. You're dragging me down." His breath smelled of scotch, his eyes sharp as knives. By the time dessert was served, I felt like I had shrunk into nothing. The laughter around me seemed cruel, echoing in my ears. When Amelia raised a toast to Victor's bright future and the family that supports him, I quietly set down my glass of water and prayed for the evening to end. The ride home was silent at first. The night outside the SUV was filled with the orange glow of streetlights. Then Victor slammed his hand against the steering wheel. "You sat there like a lump. Couldn't you at least try to keep up? Every wife in that room has a manicure, a personal trainer, some sense of style, and you, cheap dress, worn-out shoes. Do you even care how you make me look?" I turned my face toward the window, watching the blur of neon signs and fast food restaurants pass by. "I care about our son," I whispered. That only made him laugh harshly. "Lucas, don't get me started. That boy spends every waking hour with those damn robotics kits. He needs to be out on the football field, building strength, learning teamwork. Instead, he's tinkering with junk like some kind of mama's boy." My heart lurched. "He's gifted," I said firmly, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "He builds machines most adults couldn't understand. He programs them himself. He has a future." Victor's lip curled in disdain. A future as what? Some nobody engineer. Football builds leaders. Robotics builds losers. The words slammed into my chest harder than a fist. I pressed my hand against my sternum, my breath quickening, black spots flickering at the edges of my vision. Victor, I can't breathe. He shot me a glance, irritated. Not this again. Always some drama when things get real. But before he could finish, my body slumped sideways in the passenger seat. The world went dark for me. By the time the SUV screeched to a stop outside the emergency room, nurses were already rushing forward with a gurney. Victor followed, his face tight, muttering about the inconvenience. Hypertensive crisis, one of the ER doctors said quickly, checking my vitals. Severe stress. Get her on oxygen and start monitoring immediately. The bright hospital lights blurred above me as consciousness slipped away. And in that fading moment, all I could think was, have I wasted half my life with a man who despises me? When I finally opened my eyes fully, I was in a private room with an IV in my arm and the steady beep of a monitor beside my bed. A middle-aged physician in a white coat leaned over, his expression calm but serious. Mrs. Roberta, your body is sending a warning. This episode was triggered by extreme stress. You need rest in more than just a night or two. We're recommending a stress management program, maybe even a temporary stay at a wellness retreat in the Smoky Mountains. It will help you reset before something more serious happens. I nodded weakly, though my throat felt tight. I wanted to ask what would happen if I ignored the advice, but the look in the doctor's eyes told me the answer was nothing I wanted to hear. Victor sat in a chair near the window, scrolling through his phone. He glanced up only when the doctor addressed him. She's going to be fine, the physician continued. But she cannot go back into the same level of stress immediately. That would be dangerous. Of course, Victor said quickly, his tone polished, almost rehearsed. We'll do whatever it takes. He offered a tight smile, then slipped his phone back into his pocket. But as soon as the doctor left the room, the mask cracked. He checked his watch, let out a sigh, and muttered, "You sure know how to pick your moments, Roberta. I had 2 important meetings today." I looked at him from the bed, my face pale, my body heavy with fatigue. "I didn't choose this," I whispered. He didn't respond, just stood and paced the room. After a while, he added, "Look, the doctor's right. You need a change of scenery. There's a wellness retreat near Gatlinburg. They've got yoga, meditation, all that stuff. A friend recommended it. I'll book you in for a few weeks. You'll rest and I can handle things here." I knew exactly what that meant. He could handle Stella, the woman who was slowly taking my place in every corner of his life. The thought of going away, leaving Lucas behind with Victor and his disapproving mother, made my stomach knot. But my body felt so weak, so spent that resisting seemed impossible. The next morning, nurses prepped my discharge papers. Victor spoke with efficient detachment, arranging for me to be transferred directly to the retreat. To the doctors and staff, he looked like the perfect husband, responsible, attentive, making all the right decisions. Only I could see the impatience behind his eyes, the eagerness to get back to his own life without the burden of my presence. 2 days later, I arrived at the retreat, nestled deep in the Smoky Mountains. The place was beautiful in a quiet, almost haunting way. Pine trees stretched toward the sky, mist curled over the hills at dawn, and cabins were scattered across a sprawling property. Inside, I was given a modest room with a view of the woods, daily schedules of guided relaxation, diet plans, and group sessions about stress management. At first, I tried to follow the program. I attended yoga, though my body ached and my mind wandered. I listened to lectures about work-life balance, about the importance of self-care, though each word felt like a reminder of how far I had fallen from the life I once imagined. The other guests smiled politely, shared their stories of burnout in corporate jobs, marital problems, empty nests. I nodded, but said little. My own pain felt sharper, deeper, as though it didn't belong in the same category as theirs. At night, I sat by the window of my cabin, looking out at the dark silhouette of the mountains. Memories surfaced unbidden. Victor's mocking laugh at the dinner table, his harsh words about Lucas, the smirk when he mentioned Stella's name. I remembered our early years, too. How he once told me he admired my kindness, my devotion to children, my ability to see potential where others saw none. Back then, I had believed him. I had believed that love could endure differences, that kindness could bridge the gap between worlds. But sitting there in the silence of the retreat, I realized how wrong I had been. Love had faded long ago, eroded by disdain and betrayal. What remained was habit, fear of loneliness, and a desperate attempt to keep my family intact for Lucas's sake. A nurse stopped by each evening to check my vitals, reminding me to rest. I would smile, thank her, and then lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. I could no longer escape the truth. I was tethered to a man who did not love me, who saw me not as a partner, but as a burden, and for the first time I admitted to myself that I felt no love for him either. Only exhaustion, grief, and the hollow echo of years wasted. The mountains outside stood silent, ancient, and unmoved. Somewhere deep in my chest, something shifted. Not hope, not yet, but the faintest recognition that life could not continue this way. When I returned from the retreat several weeks later, the first thing I noticed was the silence in the apartment. It was too quiet, too empty. My eyes darted around the living room, and my breath caught in my throat. The shelves where my books had once lined the wall were bare. The armchair where I used to sit and grade papers was gone. Even the family photos, wedding pictures, Lucas's school portraits had vanished, leaving pale rectangles on the walls like ghosts of a life erased. "Mom," Lucas rushed to me, his face pale, his small hands trembling as he clutched my coat sleeve. Dad kept moving things. He said they were just going into storage. But every day something else disappeared. First the TV, then your sewing machine, then the silverware. I didn't know what to do. I knelt down, holding him tightly, feeling the quick thump of his heart against mine. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered, though nothing felt okay. I looked around again, the hollowness of the apartment pressing in. What once was our home now felt like a stage stripped bare after the show had ended. The sound of keys turning in the lock broke the stillness. Victor walked in, the scent of cologne heavy in the air, his expression casual as though nothing unusual had happened. He carried a folder under his arm and tossed his jacket carelessly over a chair that wasn't even ours anymore. "You're back," he said flatly. "Good. Saves me the trouble of tracking you down." I rose slowly, my body stiff. "What happened here? Where is everything?" "Streamlining," he replied without shame. "We don't need two of everything. Some of it's in storage." "Some of it? Well, Stella and I can make better use of." The name hit me like a slap, though I had been expecting it. Stella, the woman who had been lingering at the edges of my marriage for years, now stepping fully into the center. Victor opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "This is the divorce petition. I've already spoken with my attorney. Everything's straightforward. You'll sign where indicated." Lucas stood frozen, his wide eyes fixed on his father. "You're leaving us?" His voice cracked with disbelief. Victor didn't even glance at him. "Don't be dramatic. You'll still see me. We'll work out visitation. But Stella and I are moving in together, and I won't have two households draining my finances." My hands shook as I took the papers, scanning the cold legal language. The terms were as cruel as the tone in his voice. He was offering me a small apartment on the outskirts of Memphis, a place barely large enough for two people, and minimal child support, not even enough to cover basic expenses. "This isn't fair," I said softly, my throat dry. Victor smirked, pouring himself a drink from the half-empty bottle he kept by the counter. "Life's not fair, Roberta. You've been coasting along, teaching your little classes. Acting like that's enough. It's not. I'm moving forward, and you're dead weight. Be grateful I'm giving you anything at all. My face burned, but I forced myself to stay composed. Inside my chest ached with grief and humiliation, but there was no point in begging. I had begged enough already, silently for years, for respect, for love, for some sign that our marriage still meant something. Lucas's voice cut through the tension. I don't want to live with her. I want to stay with Mom. His small fists were clenched, his jaw set. Victor gave a dismissive wave. You'll adjust. Stella knows what's best for a boy your age. She'll get you into football. Get you out of this no-good stuff with robots. You'll thank me later. My heart broke for my son. But in that moment, clarity pierced through the haze of despair. This was the man I had tethered myself to for over a decade, a man who would dismantle my home, dismiss our child's passions, and replace his family without hesitation. I picked up the pen from the coffee table. My hand wavered only once before I signed each line where the yellow tabs indicated. The scratch of ink on paper sounded final, like the closing of a door. Victor snatched the papers back with a satisfied smile. Good. I'll have my lawyer file them by the end of the week. You can move into the new place by Monday. I'll have my assistant send you the address. He downed the rest of his drink and walked out as casually as he had entered, leaving behind only the echo of the closing door. I stood there, my son pressed against my side, the empty apartment yawning around us. My hands were cold, but my voice was steady as I whispered, "We'll be okay, Lucas. We'll start over. Just you and me." The boy looked up at me, his eyes brimming with tears, but also trust. And though my heart was breaking, I knew there was no turning back. I would not chase after Victor. I would not fight for a place in a life he had already given to someone else. We gathered what little was left, the few bags we had, the small things he hadn't taken, and held my son's hand tightly. Together, we stepped into the hallway, leaving behind the wreckage of a marriage that had died long before the papers made it official. The apartment Victor had arranged for us was a single-room unit in a tired complex on the outskirts of Memphis. The walls were thin, the paint peeling in spots, and the faint odor of fried food lingered in the hallways. At night, I could hear the rumble of traffic from the interstate and the occasional shouting match from neighbors through the walls. The place had no balcony, no yard, only a narrow strip of pavement where children from the building played with battered bikes. I tried to smile for Lucas's sake as we carried in our meager belongings. I placed his robotics kits neatly by the window, hoping the light in the mornings might make the room feel brighter. But I could see the disappointment in his eyes. He had gone from having a small room of his own to sleeping in the same space as his mother. Our beds were divided only by a thin curtain I rigged from an old sheet. At his new school, Lucas struggled to fit in. The kids noticed immediately that he wasn't like them. He didn't care about football or video games. His joy was in the circuits and wires of his robotics projects, which earned him teasing and worse, indifference. One afternoon, he came home sullen, his backpack dragging along the ground. They said I had to join football practice, he muttered. Coach told me robotics isn't a real club here. He said, football builds character. My stomach nodded. You don't have to give up what you love, I assured him. But the pain in his face told me he already felt like an outsider. Meanwhile, my own world was collapsing under a different weight. I had managed to keep my teaching job, but the environment at the school had shifted. The new principal, Mr. Harris, carried himself like a businessman rather than an educator. He made it clear at a staff meeting that results mattered, not the integrity of the process. I soon learned what he meant. One day, he called me into his office, leaning back in his chair with a smug smile. Mrs. Roberta, some of our parents make generous contributions to ensure their children succeed. I expect my staff to cooperate. That means a little flexibility with grades. Do you understand? My heart sank. You're asking me to take bribes, I said plainly. His smile never wavered. I'm asking you to be a team player. Everyone else manages. Don't be the one who causes trouble. I shook my head. I became a teacher to help children learn, not to sell them grades. I won't do it. The air in the room turned cold. His eyes narrowed. Then you'll find life here very difficult. And he kept his word. Within weeks, my schedule was overloaded. I was assigned extra classes without additional pay, required to cover for absent colleagues, and handed stacks of paperwork that no one else seemed to touch. I stayed late almost every night, returning home exhausted, my voice hoarse from teaching.